Out of the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a story begins to circulate about a fortune buried deep in Virginia soil. It starts in the early 1800s with a man named Thomas J Beale. Supposedly, Beale and a band of Virginia men struck it rich out west, and they began hauling wagon loads of loot back home. Instead of spending it, they buried it. They encrypted its location in a set of ciphers so complicated that only one, a single one out of 3, has ever been cracked. That one deciphered page lists the thousands of pounds of precious metals and jewels, a treasure worth tens of millions of dollars today. The other 2 pages, historians, cryptologists, treasure hunters, and even analysts at the NSA have taken a swing at it to no avail. More than 200 years later, the Beale Treasure sits at the intersection of folklore and madness. Part Southern legend, part code-breaking nightmare. And because the entire story comes from a single 1885 pamphlet printed in Lynchburg, every part of it has been fought over. Is it a hoax? A riddle? A cipher with the wrong key? Or is there truly a vault of gold buried somewhere outside of Bedford, still waiting in the quiet hills? On this episode, we're digging into the real history, the ciphers, the skepticism, and the theories that have kept people searching for more than a century. Welcome to the Southern Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Swift, and today we're heading into the mountains of Virginia to explore one of the most persistent unsolved mysteries in American history, the Beale Treasure. To understand why this story has never faded, you have to start with what we think we know, the facts that can be traced, the documents that have survived, and the timeline that, for better or worse, forms the backbone of the entire legend. We will also discuss all the theories surrounding this legend. So just sit back, relax, grab a drink, and let me paint a picture. But I guess if you're in a vehicle, don't do any of those things. Keep your eyes on the road and just let me tell you the tale of Thomas J Beale and the Beale Treasure. Okay, according to the 1885 pamphlet that introduced the world to the Beale Treasure and secondhand accounts, the story begins sometime around 1817. A man named Thomas J Beale supposedly led a group of more than 30 men from Virginia out west on a long hunting expedition. According to some accounts, Thomas J Beale was born around 1792. He's said to have grown up in Fincastle, Virginia, roughly 60 miles from Lynchburg. On paper, it seems like the beginning of a respectable life. His family was reportedly well known in the area. But Thomas, he was a restless man, drawn to movement, to distance, to whatever existed beyond the edge of what he knew. And it's that restlessness, whether real or exaggerated, that supposedly sets everything else in motion. But also, according to legend, in the spring of 1817, a 25-year-old Thomas J Beale became entangled with a woman who was already involved with one of his neighbors. Seems that Thomas Beale had a reputation for charm and, just as importantly, ignoring boundaries. What followed, depending on the version you read, was inevitable for the time. There was a challenge, pistols, and a duel arranged outside of town. The two men allegedly met in a secluded field. They took their positions, they turned, they fired. When the smoke cleared, it was Thomas Beale's opponent who fell. Believing the man dead and knowing what it could mean if he stayed around, Thomas fled. Whether the neighbors survived or not is unclear. What matters is that Thomas didn't wait to find out. So, expedition out west it is. He signed on with a hunting and gambling expedition headed out. The promise was simple. Months of danger, open land, and a life lived far from the reach of local judgment. Thomas wanted to get out of town, and this was a great way to do it. For Thomas, it offered something else as well, just time. Time for his name to fade back home. He just, like I said, needed and wanted to get out of there, and this was a great opportunity. In April of 1870, Beale and roughly 30 other men left Virginia, like I said. By May, they reached St. Louis, then still part of the Missouri Territory. From there, the party pushed south and then west, moving toward what was then considered safer territory. By early December, they had reached Santa Fe, where they settled in for the winter. The men, they hunted constantly. They were hunting buffalo, elk, deer, bear, sheep, and, they were eating really well. They survived. And then, according to the story, they began to really prosper. While on the trip, the men reportedly discovered a rich vein of gold and silver. But whatever they found, the story says, it was enough that they just couldn't simply sit on it. They needed to get it out of there and carry it out. And they couldn't just, carry it with them. It was just too much weight, too much valuables that were on them. By the summer of 1819, the story says the group reached a decision. Whatever they found, like I said, out west was just too valuable to sit on, so they needed a secure location, someplace where all of these jewels and loot and minerals could sit and be secure. And so Thomas J. Beale was chosen to take responsibility for this. According to the account, the plan was to bring the fortune back east, back to Virginia, where the men believed it would be safer, easier to protect, and eventually placed under the care of someone they trusted. That is until a permanent solution could be arranged. The treasure would be hidden temporarily in Bedford County, near Lynchburg, in a cave believed to be remote enough to avoid attention. By 1819, and then again in 1821, the group supposedly buried two major deposits of treasure. The inventory later recorded in the decoded cipher is staggering. Thousands of pounds of gold and silver, plus a purchase of jewels from a dealer in St. Louis when they stopped there, are all sealed in a vault somewhere in the hills. The thought was that one of the ciphers would have the names of the individuals involved with the treasure and their next of kin, in case something happened to them and they could just stake their claim to the contents of his hidden treasure. So supposedly, it had the names of the people who had found the treasure, but also the next of kin in case something happened. Supposedly, Beale, while in Lynchburg, takes up residence at the Washington Hotel, run by an innkeeper named Robert Morris. So Thomas J. Beale and Morris, they strike up a friendship. Beale is also, looking for someone he can entrust with the treasure while he's away. So when Thomas J. Beale prepares to leave town, he hands Morris a small iron box and asks him to hold on to it for safekeeping. Inside the box are several papers, letters, but then there's 3 sheets covered edge to edge in long columns of just numbers. So Thomas Beale tells Morris that these numbers are important, but meaningless without a key. He explains that the key will be mailed to Morris at a later date, and that if Thomas does not return within 10 years, Morris should open the box and follow the instructions inside. Then Thomas J. Beale leaves. He leaves Lynchburg, and he's heading back out west. Allegedly, Thomas sent a letter from St. Louis a few months later, promising Morris that a friend in St. Louis would mail the key to the ciphers. But it never arrived. And that's the last time anyone ever claims to see or hear from Thomas J. Beale again. "10 years pass, then more. No letters ever arrive. No key shows up. No word from Thomas Beale. No word from anyone. Eventually, 23 years later, in 1845, Morris opens the iron box. He finds the 3 cipher texts and the accompanying letters. But without the promised key, they may as well be written in another language. For years, Morris attempts to decode them himself, but he's just not able to decrypt them. He eventually passes it off to an unnamed friend. The identity of this person is never truly known. There are speculations and wild guesses, but officially, this person's name is never revealed. A year later, Morris passes away, leaving this unnamed person to decipher all of this. This unnamed decoder reportedly kept coming back to Beale's full name, Thomas J. Beale. At some point, the idea surfaced that the middle initial might stand for Jefferson, as in Thomas Jefferson. There's no proof that it did, but once that thought entered the picture, it opened another door. If the name Jefferson mattered, then so might the most famous Jefferson-associated document in American history might matter, and that's the Declaration of Independence. It was a leap, an educated guess at best, but the story says it worked. Using the Declaration of Independence as a key, he deciphers one of the 3 coded pages. And what it reveals is not directions, not names, but an inventory. It listed gold, silver, jewels, thousands of pounds of precious metal buried deep in a vault somewhere in Bedford County, Virginia. The other 2 cipher pages, the ones believed to describe the treasure's exact location, and the one believed to list the men involved and their next of kin, remain completely unreadable. The key that was supposed to unlock them, they, again, never arrived. And without it, the most important pieces of the puzzle stayed locked. Really doesn't matter what the contents of the treasure is if you can't find it and don't know who actually it belongs to. But in 1885, decades after Thomas J. Beale vanished, and years after Morris himself had passed away, the story finally went public. A pamphlet titled The Beale Papers was printed in Lynchburg, laying out the whole narrative, the ciphers, and the decoded inventory for the first time. The pamphlet was published by James B. Ward, a Lynchburg resident who presented himself not as a participant in the events, but as the editor of material that had been entrusted to him. Ward stated that the papers came to him from this unnamed person that had managed to solve one of the ciphers using the Declaration of Independence as a key. Now, James Ward offered no independent documentation to support this story. He included no letters written from Beale, kind of outside of this narrative, there's no records of the Western expedition. There's nothing else that he can produce. But every detail, including Thomas J Beale, the treasure, and the other ciphers, ultimately, a lot of this traces back to this single publication that James B. Ward puts out. Now, Ward claimed his reason for publishing the pamphlet was practical rather than, sensational. According to his account, he believed the original parties involved were likely all dead, and that printing the information publicly was the only remaining chance for any rightful heirs to, ever learn of the treasure's existence. In 1885, Ward had the pamphlets printed and offered them to the public for 50 cents apiece, convinced that the mystery of the Beale ciphers could, spark interest. In today's money, that's like $14 a piece for a pamphlet. So Ward was going to, he's going to be able to make some money off of this. But before he could really start rolling in the dough and rolling out his plan, a catastrophic fire tore through the printing plant. Nearly the entire run of the Beale pamphlets was destroyed in the blaze, leaving only a small number of copies left behind. But those surviving pamphlets were enough. They stirred local curiosity. The word of the treasure began to spread, and soon the story moved well beyond Virginia, traveling up and down the East Coast and embedding itself in American folklore. From that point on, from 1885 to present day, thousands of amateurs and professional code breakers have taken a crack at the Beale's remaining ciphers. People have tried every imaginable approach, testing countless different keys, theories, and substitutions in search of the hidden solution. And yet, even with modern computing power and more than a century of effort, the final two Beale ciphers remain unsolved to this day, and the treasure, if it ever existed at all, has never been found, supposedly. But let's talk a little bit about the ciphers themselves. Inside that iron box were those three separate pages, each filled with nothing but numbers. There's, no punctuation, no spaces, just long columns of figures. And what I'll do is I will put some photos on my Patreon page for those that have signed up for that, so you can kind of get an idea of what they look like and everything like that. But over time, these three, pages, was simply known as Cipher 1, Cipher 2, and Cipher 3. And like I've said, only Cipher number 2 is the only one that has ever been cracked. That one decoded page is the single strongest piece of evidence that keeps this whole Beale story alive. Cipher number 1, again, is believed to describe the location of the treasure. Now, there's the letters that were in the box kind of give a general idea, but one of these ciphers supposedly lists the exact location. It's the longest of the three, but it has defeated everyone. When researchers apply the same Declaration of Independence method used for for Cipher 2, it produces nonsense. And of course, there's been other documents that people have tried to use, the Magna Carta, but still, there's just no success there. Cipher number 3 is shorter and is believed to list the names of the men involved in the expedition along with their next of kin. If it could be solved, it might finally tie Beale's story to real families and real records. But like Cipher 1, it just refuses to cooperate and no one can crack these things. And that contrast is what makes these ciphers so maddening. 1 works perfectly, 2 don't work at all, not particularly, not almost, it's just not even close. And that inconsistency is the engine of this entire mystery. And this is where we have to slow down and ask some uncomfortable questions. Because as compelling as this story is, it has some problems, some pretty big ones. So for starters, everything we know about the Beale Treasure comes from a single source, really, the 1885 pamphlet. There are no surviving letters written by Thomas Beale outside of it, no contemporary newspaper accounts, no land records, no court documents, no shipping manifests, no mention of a massive gold discovery by a party of Virginia men in the West. I mean, you would think with a massive discovery like that, somebody would have said something. And if you look at Thomas Beale himself, he's a ghost. There are people named Thomas Beale in early Virginia records, but none who can be conclusively tied to this story. No clear trail places him in the West or in St. Louis or back in Lynchburg at that time. There are rumors and secondhand accounts that allege certain things, but nothing concrete or definitive. What I told you about, Thomas Beale, the duel, the heading out west, it's not verified. It's just allegedly what happened. And then there's the ciphers themselves. As I've mentioned, modern cryptographers have analyzed them using computers and statistical methods and pattern analysis. Cipher 2 behaves like a real message, even though that's kind of disputed. Cipher 1 and Cipher 3 behave just completely differently, though. Their number distributions don't show the same linguistic structure. To some analysts, they just look random, not encrypted language at all. And that raises some unsettling possibilities. What if only one of the ciphers was ever actually meant to work? It wouldn't be the first time a puzzle was designed with a single convincing solution with a dead end built in. In the 19th century, literary hoaxes, cipher challenges, and puzzle pamphlets were actually kind of common. Even Edgar Allan Poe famously wrote about ciphers and even challenged readers to solve them. So the question becomes, are Cipher 1 and Cipher 3 simply unsolved, or are they actually unsolvable? That's the red flags that skeptics, they just can't ignore. And yet, skepticism doesn't quite kill the story either, because hoaxes usually fall apart. They crack under scrutiny. The Beale story hasn't. It's stubborn. It still sits right on the edge between believable and just simply impossible. So it's well established now that through the pamphlet and secondhand accounts, that the treasure is buried somewhere in Bedford County, Virginia, supposedly about 4 miles from a place called Buford's Tavern. Now, this tavern no longer exists. The exact location is also debated. And, roads have changed. Even, creeks, they shift. Things happen over time. And over the last, century or so, people have searched these hills with shovels and metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery. Holes have been dug, claims have been made, rumors have spread. And at one point, this whole hunt even became organized. From the late 1960s through the 1980s, a group calling itself the Beale Cipher Association, or BCA, formed with a single goal in mind, and that's cracking the remaining ciphers. Members shared research, compared notes, and devoted years to solving what Cipher 1 and Cipher 3 refused to give up. So they've started a group and all kind of banding together to see if they can solve this riddle. But they didn't succeed. But like everyone else drawn into the Beale mystery, they added another layer to it, proof that this wasn't just a story people read about, but something they committed real time to, money to, and a belief to chasing. They strongly believed that this was a real treasure, and they were hell-bent on cracking these codes. Because Bedford County isn't just empty land, it's been lived on, farmed, logged, hunted, and developed for, generations now. If there was a massive vault or metal buried there, it's reasonable to ask how it's, avoided discovery for more than 200 years. But the BCA wasn't the only one that was out hunting for this treasure. In the early 1980s, a woman named Marilyn Parsons traveled from Pennsylvania to Virginia, convinced she had it all figured out. She believed the Beale treasure wasn't hidden in the hills or in the woods at all, but beneath an old cemetery. Marilyn was so certain of her conclusion that she cashed in her disability checks to fund the trip. Once she arrived, she then hired a construction company and arranged to use a backhoe to dig directly into the graveyard. Now, the excavation didn't uncover gold. It didn't uncover silver. It uncovered what you think it would uncover when digging in a cemetery: human remains. As you might expect, disturbing a church cemetery didn't end quietly. Old Marilyn Parsons was arrested, and the dig was shut down immediately. And this whole fiasco became another cautionary tale, not just about chasing treasure, but how far people would go with their belief and how far it would carry them when the line of theory and reality, kind of disappears. And that is one aspect about buried treasure or, modern day treasure hunters. And this is what they face now. And I think back in episode 1, we talked about The Secret, a Treasure Hunt by, Byron Price, where he buried all those ceramic boxes with keys in it. The thing is, they were all buried in public places, even parks. And over time, things are built over. Construction happens. And also, like in Marilyn's case, you can't just go digging any old place you want, especially a cemetery. I mean, come on. But when people bury things, again, times change, things change. And treasure could be on or end up being on private property. You may need a permit to dig. But stories like Marilyn's help explain why the area around Bedford County is rarely quiet for long. Decade after decade, new groups arrive, some with maps, some with metal detectors, some with theories that feel airtight until they aren't. And again, this treasure has never been found. Supposedly. Now, I keep saying supposedly because there are certainly theories that claim that the treasure has actually been found. And I want to talk a little bit about some of these theories. There's one theory that the cipher was broken long before 1885, but the identity of the decoder was deliberately suppressed. And some versions claim that the solution circulated privately among a small group of Lynchburg and Bedford County folks, and that the pamphlet that was put out was just more of like a sanitized public version. But, the treasure had already been found, and everybody in the area kind of already knew that, this was, a found treasure. No big deal. There's also another, like, more conspiratorial branch claiming that the Beale treasure was never about gold at all, and that cipher number 2 is a distraction. In these circles, the inventory, quote unquote, is said to be symbolic, standing in for something else, totally something else, like land claims, political documents, or records of illegal activity. Under this theory, whoever broke the cipher knew it wasn't meant to be taken literally, and the public was deliberately misled. And I'm not saying that any of these theories make a bit of sense. It's just what I've read and what I've seen. But another theory that I've seen, some online communities insist that the cipher solution is wrong, even if it appears to kind of work. They argue that the Declaration of Independence was chosen retroactively because it produces readable English, not because it was the intended key. According to these claims, the real key is a different founding era document. And cipher number 2's current solution is just kind of like a convincing coincidence. The most, I guess, widely accepted explanation in theory is that it's just a hoax. This doesn't mean that the Beale Papers were written as a prank in the, kind of like the modern sense. It means that they may have been created as a piece of 19th century entertainment, a dramatic story wrapped around a clever cipher designed to, sell pamphlets and create attention. Cipher number 2 works just well enough to hook you in. Ciphers number 1 and 3 keep you chasing something that never quite materializes. Or there is the theory that James B. Ward himself decoded cipher number 2 and then invented the quote-unquote unnamed friend to distance himself from the solution. In these discussions, Ward isn't just a publisher. He's portrayed as the architect of the entire story. Some go further and argue that Cipher 2 was written after the story, not before it, meaning the solution was reverse engineered to appear legitimate. And that leads back to the whole hoax theory. There are a lot of theories around James B. Ward, different like little variations. One is that, Ward intentionally created only one solvable cipher to hook readers while leaving the others unsolvable to guarantee like endless speculation and again, leading to pamphlet sales. Online forums often point to the clean readability of Cipher 2 versus the statistical noise of Ciphers 1 and 3 as proof of a deliberate design. From this perspective, the mystery isn't unfinished. It's, functioning exactly as Ward intended. Another theory suggests the ciphers are legitimate, but we're missing the keys. In the early 1800s, book ciphers didn't rely on a single source text a lot of times. It was common to use different books for different messages. Cipher 2 might have used the Declaration of Independence, while Cipher 1 and Cipher 3 could rely on entirely different documents. A journal, a ledger, a book that no longer even exists. If that's the case, the failure to solve them isn't proof of deception, it's proof that the puzzle is incomplete. You'll also find theories asserting that a government agency quietly solved the ciphers in the 20th century. When it comes to decoding ciphers, especially in America, there's one name that towers over the rest, and that is William Friedman. He is widely regarded as the father of modern U.S. code breaking and one of the key figures behind what would eventually become the National Security Agency, or the NSA. During the 1930s, Friedman served as chief of U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service, the organization responsible for cracking foreign codes and securing American communications. So William Friedman's, he's the man, right? And this is the perfect person to take a stab at these ciphers. But he works on these for decades. He keeps returning to them during his spare time, but he took it serious. He especially spent a lot of times on the two unsolved texts, the ciphers. One that had the treasure's location, the other one that had the list of heirs. And he would eventually bring in like other colleagues and then students. And at one point, he even assigned the Beale Papers to students as an exercise in the Signal Intelligence Training Program. And still, despite all of that, still nothing. In the end, Friedman admitted defeat. He never cracked the remaining ciphers. After years of effort, he just walked away, frustrated, exhausted, and convinced that he had taken them as far as they could go. And that should have been the end of it. But, people didn't like that explanation. R. Hamill is one of those people that didn't like the explanation. He didn't believe what Friedman was saying, that he couldn't do it, and he just simply walked away from it. Now, Hamill was a former president of the American Cryptogram Association, and he publicly accused Friedman of giving up too easily, and then went further, suggesting that Friedman might have solved the ciphers and just chosen not to tell people. Now, Hamill offered no evidence, nothing at all, and Friedman was like, "I'm not even going to dignify this with a response." He made it clear that he didn't owe Hamill or anyone else any explanation at all. But once kind of like this idea that the NSA might be lying and might know something, the theories exploded. Some people became convinced government, cryptographers had cracked the location cipher and just quietly removed the treasure themselves and buried the truth along with it. By the 1970s, treasure hunters like Frederick Chasins, they were openly claiming the NSA agents had slipped into the Blue Ridge foothills disguised as Forest Service workers and quietly removed the gold, the silver, and the jewels. Now, there's no proof of any of that, but once a mystery reaches this stage, proof almost stops mattering, right? Because when you have the best code breaker in American history who just, kind of simply walks away empty-handed, people just don't accept that. They assume someone knows more than what they're saying. And I guess it's plausible that they could have cracked the ciphers and then, I guess, posed as forest agents, or just simply didn't pose as anybody and just went up into the foothills and found the treasure. But I have to, you got to think that through. So they go up there, no one sees them doing this. And it's not like supposedly the contents are just like a ton of gold and silver and jewels, right? It's not like a tiny little box, right? It's supposed to be like a whole vault full of stuff. Like it's, and again, speculating and allegedly, like it's in a cave. It might be in a cave. Maybe it's buried. So they would have to find the exact location. Say it's, even if it wasn't a cave, they got to find the exact cave or dig it up. And then, so they just have all this gold and silver, and then they, you got to sell it somewhere. So I don't know. I guess it's plausible that it could happen. But again, like, if the treasure was found, somebody would have to say something. It's not like a little bit of treasure, right? Supposedly it's a ton of stuff. But I digress. I don't know what I really feel about that. But yeah, I guess it could be. Plausible. I always love when people claim the government has done something like that. I think that's always like the fallback, right, of everything. So the whole story of Thomas Beale's Western expedition starts to kind of wobble the closer you look at it. The most obvious problem to me is just the timing. According to the account, Beale's party struck gold, 1817, 1818. Even if it's 1816, 15, 1820, whatever. That's a full, 30 years before 1848, which is the date that marks the beginning of the California gold rush. So, if Thomas Beale truly discovered a massive gold deposit decades earlier, you'd expect some trace of it, some type of newspaper reports or government correspondence, a landmark, something. But outside of Beale's own letters and supposedly his quote-unquote own letters, there's nothing. There's also an issue of the scale of this expedition. So Thomas Beale claimed to have traveled with roughly 30 men. That's a large organized group moving deep into territory that at the time was not part of the United States. A party that size wandering through what was then Mexican-controlled land would almost certainly have drawn attention and likely legal trouble. For Beale's group to camp, hunt, and mine freely in present-day New Mexico, 1818, without consequences, I don't know, that strains credibility. Still, some researchers have tried to bridge that gap. In the 1980s, if you remember back to the Beale Cipher Association, they started in the 1960s, they ran through the 80s. It's, a collection of folks coming together to form this association to, help break these codes. But one of the members was a former CIA agent named Carl Nelson Jr., and he attempted to find evidence that Thomas Beale's party actually passed through known frontier checkpoints. And he focused on St. Louis, which would have been the last major American city before heading out west. Nelson claimed to have found references to an S.T. Beale in an October 1817 notice in the Missouri Gazette, and another mention of a Thomas Beale in an 1820 issue of the Franklin Intelligencer, which is a heck of a name, Franklin Intelligencer. Anyway, 1817 and 1820, those dates or years at least kind of match up with the story that we kind of know. The only problem is S.T. Beale is not the same as T.J. Beale, and even the Thomas Beale, the last name is spelled differently. Thomas J Beale is spelled B-E-A-L-E, but in these notices, the last name is spelled different. Now, I will say, especially back in the day, we've seen that names are, could be spelled differently and everything like that. So it could be plausible that it could have been the same person. And the years certainly match up. But again, the last names don't match, and ST is not the same as TJ. There's also a problem with the ciphers themselves. If you look at Cipher 3, the one said to have, listed out the heirs of the miners and people that found this treasure, Now, that cipher contains 618 numbers, which sounds like a lot. But several researchers have pointed out that it's just not enough space. If each number corresponds to a single letter, that doesn't leave a lot of space to account for 30 minors and their relatives. It's just not enough space, no matter how you kind of look at it. So it's kind of implausible. So there's an issue even with the cipher. Then you have Cipher 2, the one that everyone points to as proof that the system works. You know, that was the one that was decoded by the Declaration of Independence. But in 2013, NSA cryptanalyst Dr. Todd Mater, he revisited the Declaration of Independence as the solution, and he found inconsistencies. Now, true believers are going to say, well, of course the NSA is going to say that because, you know, they had already found the treasure. But again, you know, you have experts, quote-unquote experts, testing these theories, and it's still not coming up clean. And also, too, in the early 1980s, there was a Dr. Pavel who was a linguist. He compared the wording of Thomas Beale's letters to the prose in James B. Ward's 1885 pamphlet. The same publication that introduced this whole story and sold for, you know, what is now 50 cents. It was 50 cents a copy, which would be like $14 today. And so Dr. Pavel noted striking similarities in tone, structure, and phrasing, suggesting that both documents may have come from the same hand. None of this really proves that the Beale story is completely false. But taken together, the inconsistencies do, for me at least, they do pile up. The dates don't really line up. The geography raises some questions. The records don't really cooperate. And even the documents themselves seem to maybe echo one another. Maybe Ward wrote all of this. Which doesn't end the mystery. It does explain why more than, 2 centuries later, the Beale Treasure still sits uncomfortably between like history and maybe invention, folklore, and like just good marketing. On one side are the skeptics. They look at the lack of documentation, the absence of Beale in historic records, the behavior of the unsolved ciphers under modern analysis, and they see a story that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. To them, the Beale Papers are a well-crafted legend, a single clever cipher wrapped in, fiction, stretched thin over time. On the other side, you have the believers. And belief here doesn't always mean blind faith. Many of them are engineers, mathematicians, cryptographers. They point to, cipher number 2 and say, hey, that doesn't happen by accident. And they argue that real puzzles sometimes resist solution for a long time, even centuries. What makes the Beale Treasure so frustrating and so fascinating is that both sides, kind of have a point. Skeptics can't fully explain why Cipher 2 works as cleanly as it does, even though that has been argued. And believers can't explain why there's really no trace of Beale outside of the pamphlet and hearsay, although we did talk about the mentions in the Missouri Gazette and the mentions of Beale, even though the names don't quite match up. But the evidence never quite tips its scale on either side. And that tension between belief and doubt is what keeps this whole story alive. Kind of like forces you to, kind of like pick a side, but then kind of second guess yourself as you hear it. You lean one way and then you kind of drift back over to the other. And, very few kind of sit comfortably in the middle of this story. You either believe or you don't. And maybe that's the real reason the Beale Treasure endures. Not because of the gold or the silver, not even the ciphers themselves, because it just refuses to be resolved. Whether Thomas J Beale was a real man or a carefully constructed character, the story has escaped its creator. It no longer belongs to the pamphlet. It belongs to the questions it leaves behind. And those questions are pretty powerful. Why create 3 ciphers if only one can be solved? Why leave behind an inventory and not a map? Why trust a stranger with something so valuable and then vanish? If the Beale treasure were found today, the mystery would end. But because it hasn't been, because it remains buried, missing, or maybe even imaginary, it continues to pull people in. Maybe some stories aren't meant to be solved. Maybe some stories are meant to be carried forward, reshaped by every generation that encounters them. And there you have it. As much as I like to romanticize things and love stories like this about lost treasure, the inner Goonie in me wants to believe. But I also work in marketing, and I know a good story when I see and hear one. The pamphlet that was sold by James Ward, well, to me, that's just really good marketing. And I think that's where I lean. I think this was an elaborate hoax to sell a pamphlet. Too many people have tried to crack the code. Too many treasure hunters have physically looked for it. They even did an Expedition Unknown episode on it, and they found nothing. It's just, for me, too convenient that the one cipher that was solved just happened to be the one that tells what the treasure is. But, with all that said, I would love to be wrong. I would love for the ciphers to be decoded and the treasure found. Now, of course, some people would say they have been decoded and the treasure has been found. But anyway, I love stories like these, and I hope you do too. If you liked this episode, please give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. Tell us what you think about the show or this episode or your theories. It really does help get the show out to more people. Really big thank you to my producer, Corey Ensko, for getting this episode out. We also have a Patreon page that helps support the show. It's called The Hidden Pond Lodge. The Hidden Pond Lodge is our private community. It's a place for listeners and readers who want to go deeper into Southern history, folklore, unsolved mysteries, and we even have a book club. Membership gets you access to our private Discord. It's where we talk about the episodes, and we really talk about all types of stuff. There's channels for hiking, fly fishing, bourbon, cigars, beer, gardening, folklore, history, all types of stuff. And like I said, we do have a book club. Each month we pick a book that's tied to, Southern history or true crime, folklore, or unexplained stories. We talk about it throughout the month, and at the end of the month, we have a virtual hangout where we, sit back, relax, and chat about the book. I hope you, like I said, enjoyed the show. I really appreciate all of you guys and gals supporting the show. It means a lot to me. And y'all, I will talk to you later.